If it means not freezing to death tonight, then take me. I won't fight." She didn't whisper it. She chose it, like every woman forced to survive a world built against her. She was just a runaway, branded a thief, hunted by her own blood. But just as rough hands reached for her, a quiet voice cut through the storm. The lady said no. One scarred rancher stepped out of the shadows, not to claim her, but to protect her. And when her past came back with a pistol and a lie, Clara Wynn didn't run. She stood on that snowy porch, finger on the trigger, heart wide open. One shot could end it all, or begin everything. Clara Wynn was once the pride of her father's home, the daughter of a well-known merchant in Bridal Creek. She was raised with proper manners, a sharp mind, and a sense of justice too inconvenient for the world she lived in. Her fall from grace wasn't the result of scandal or shame, but the simple act of speaking the truth. When she discovered what her older brother Silas had done to a young girl under their roof, someone who trusted him, she confronted it head on. She told her father. She begged him to see it. But like too many men protecting their legacy, he turned blind, deaf, and cruel. Silas, after all, was his heir. Clara, just a daughter with too many opinions. So the whispers started, then the warnings. Then one day her key didn't work in the front door. Branded as a liar, unstable, or worse, jealous, Clara found herself erased from the house she once called home. Her reputation fell harder than any criminal sentence, not because she had sinned, but because she had dared to tell the truth. And the frontier does not forgive women who tell the truth. She drifted from town to town, carrying only a small satchel and the weight of her name. For 4 nights, she had no roof over her head. Her feet were blistered from walking, her shawl threadbare against the wind. She had slept under porches, in empty barns, in the hollow of an old wagon left to rot. And still, when offered a warm room by men with smiles too wide and promises too thin, she said no. There's a kind of strength the world rarely praises, the strength it takes to stay clean when survival would be easier if you let go. Clara clung to her dignity like it was the last thing keeping her alive, because in many ways it was. The townspeople didn't help. They looked at her hunger and saw disgrace, saw a woman alone and assumed she was fallen. On the frontier, a man's sins were brushed aside, but a woman's resilience, that was treated like rebellion. And then, when her strength was almost gone, a voice cut through the snow, not loud, not demanding, just quiet, steady, kind. "You hungry?" Reid Callahan stood with snow on his coat and honesty in his eyes. Not a savior, just a man offering a job, and maybe something far rarer, respect. Reid Callahan was a man carved by winter, inside and out. His quiet wasn't empty, it was earned. Years of loss had hollowed him out in places no one could see. The townspeople of Silver Hollow often called him distant, but they didn't understand him. He wasn't cold, he was careful. Careful with his words, careful with his heart, and careful with hope. Once he had planned a future with a woman named Maeve Fallon, a kind-hearted school teacher with a laugh that lit up rooms and plans for a house filled with children. But a harsh winter brought more than snow. It brought fever. Maeve's life was gone in days, leaving only her quilt, her books, and Reid's silence behind. Since then, Reid kept a Stonebrush farm, a weathered ranch nestled beneath the hills. The beams creaked, the paint peeled, but it stood strong, like him. He lived alone, his only companions, the cattle and wind. He didn't trust easily, especially not the kind of men who filled the town's saloons with liquor and lies. But he noticed people, really noticed them. So when he found Clara Wynn half frozen in an alley, he didn't see a scandal. He saw a woman still standing, despite the storm. He offered her no pity, no judgment, just a warm coat and a job, cooking, cleaning, keeping the hearth alive. No conditions, no expectations. Clara, hardened by betrayal and disgusted by men who had only ever seen her as an object or a burden, didn't trust his offer. Why would she? Every so-called kindness she'd received since being cast out had a price. But Reid's eyes didn't wander. His words didn't twist. He was the first man in a long time who saw her as a person and not a problem. In the days that followed, Clara learned more about him, not because he told her, but because he couldn't help but reveal pieces of himself through small, quiet acts. She noticed how he touched the old barn beam with a reverent hand. One evening he mentioned, without drama, that it was rebuilt after a fire. His younger brother Cole had died saving the livestock inside. And in his room, beneath a loose floorboard she discovered while cleaning, she found a journal. Inside were poems, some clearly written for Maeve. Others were more recent, fragile and hesitant, like a man trying to remember how to feel. One poem described a woman who didn't tremble, even when the wind howled. Reid never asked for her story. He simply gave her a place to rest and the space to be whole again. And in his stillness, Clara found something she never expected again: safety. Clara Wynn had grown used to being invisible, or worse, being seen only as a burden, a scandal, a woman too proud to beg and too ruined to trust. But life at Stonebrush Farm, with its steady rhythms and unspoken grace, slowly began to shift the way she carried herself. Each day peeled away a layer of fear, not all at once, but like frost melting under morning sun. She started with simple tasks: chopping vegetables, lighting the stove, sweeping dust from corners no one had touched in years. The old iron stove was unpredictable, hissing at the wrong moments and stubborn to heat. At first, she burned nearly everything she tried. Her frustration simmered in silence, but Reid never commented. When smoke filled the kitchen one morning and the eggs turned black in the pan, she turned to him, braced for criticism, but he only shrugged and said, "Eggs are cheap. Keep trying." That simple mercy, so rare in her life, cut deeper than any insult could have. Clara's days slowly filled with small, familiar acts: kneading bread, washing linens, learning the best way to coax a flame from wet kindling. With each task, her hands remembered the life she'd once dreamed of, not the one forced on her by exile or shame, but one she chose, built moment by moment. It wasn't just chores she was learning to accept care again, and she didn't have to do it alone. In town, she met Mrs. Daly, a warm-eyed widow with a crooked back and a surprisingly sharp tongue. Mrs. Daly had known what it was like to start over, after losing a husband and a child within the same winter. She took to Clara like a quiet mentor, gently teaching her how to make sourdough from scratch. "Starters like trust," she'd say while guiding Clara's hands through the dough. "You've got to feed it regular, and it'll still go bad if you don't watch it. But if you care for it, it'll surprise you." Clara began to visit once a week, not just for the bread, but for the companionship. The old woman didn't ask probing questions. She offered space, and that was its own kind of kindness. Then there was Elias, the aging owner of the general store. At first, he watched Clara with the same cautious eye the rest of town used. But over time, he noticed her quiet manners, the way she thanked him for every purchase, even if it was just a sack of flour or a bundle of matches. He noticed that Reid never flinched when Clara spoke, never hovered too close. One day, after overhearing two men whispering about her past, Elias barked, "She's done more honest work in a week than most of you have in a year. You want to talk reputation? Start with your own." From that moment, the town's tone toward Clara began to shift, just slightly, but enough for her to notice. At the farm, it was the little things that began to speak the loudest. She'd find fresh quilts folded at the foot of her bed after a hard day, or honey placed near her tea without mention. A small stack of novels appeared by her bedroom window, well-worn, with creased spines and notes in the margins. She knew Reid had left them, even if he never said so. These weren't grand gestures. They were the kind of kindnesses that didn't demand anything in return. And Reid himself, he never tried to save her. He didn't act like she was fragile or tragic. He treated her like someone worth listening to, worth trusting. One evening, as she poured coffee into his tin cup, Clara accidentally knocked over the sugar bowl. It shattered on the floor and she froze, instinctively waiting for scolding or sarcasm. But Reid just looked at her calmly and said, "No harm done, just sugar." No harm done. That was the difference between the life she had fled and the life she was beginning to build. For the first time in so long, she wasn't being measured by her past or weighed down by survival. She was allowed to be human, messy, imperfect, trying. And in that quiet space, healing began, not with declarations or confessions, but with respect, silence, and time. Clara didn't know where this path would lead, but for now it was enough to stand in a kitchen that smelled like fresh bread, beside a man who saw her not as broken, but as becoming. The morning Silas Wynn rode into Silver Hollow, the wind carried more than just snow. It carried the scent of danger, of something Clara hadn't faced in months, her past. He arrived with polished boots, a tailored wool coat, and two men flanking him like shadows. One held a folded paper, the other a quiet, threatening stillness. Silas hadn't changed, his smile still too sharp, his voice still smooth like poisoned honey. His presence shattered the fragile peace Clara had begun to build. He came to Stonebrush Farm without warning. Reid was chopping firewood out back when the knock came. Clara answered the door and froze. Silas removed his gloves slowly, theatrically. "Well, well, there you are, sister." Clara's hand trembled slightly on the doorframe. "You shouldn't be here." He tisked. "Father's terribly worried. Thought you'd lost your mind. And now I find you shacked up with a rancher?" His eyes scanned the room with contempt. Not very dignified. Reid stepped into the doorway behind Clara, his presence immediate and solid. "What do you want?" Silas produced a warrant with a dramatic flick of his wrist. "I've come to take Clara home. She's accused of theft. $200 taken from our father's store the night she disappeared. This paper's from the sheriff in Laramie. Signed and sealed." Reid didn't move. "And how convenient you're the one carrying it." Silas's smile faltered. "Are you really going to protect her? You don't know what she did in Laramie. Ask about Nathan Webb. Ask what she was doing in his rooms, or how much he paid her before she ruined his reputation." Clara went still. Reid looked to her, but not with doubt, only quiet readiness. "I don't care what you say she did," Reid said. "She doesn't owe you anything. You don't get to define her." That was when Silas dropped the pretense. With a flick of his hand, one of his men moved forward, aggressively. Reid stepped between him and Clara. A shove, then a punch, then the sound of fists cracking bone. Reid held his ground, but Silas was faster than anyone expected. He pulled a small blade from his coat and lunged. Clara screamed as the knife grazed Reid's shoulder, slicing through his coat and drawing blood. In the chaos, her hand found the revolver Reid kept by the mantel. She had never held it before, but now her fingers were steady. "Silas!" she shouted. Her brother froze, eyes wide, seeing the barrel aimed squarely at his chest. "Let him go!" she ordered, voice shaking with fury. "You won't shoot me," Silas hissed. "You've always been too soft." "Try me," Clara said, louder now. "You hurt one more person and I swear I will stop you." The air hung heavy, her hands trembled, but her heart did not. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't surviving. She was fighting back. And then she spoke. "You want to talk about scandal?" she said, voice rising. "Let's talk about what you did to Emily Caro. She was 17. She trusted you. She came to our house and left in the middle of the night with bruises on her arms and tears in her dress." Silas turned pale. "You told father she lied, said I made it up to get attention. But I saw what you did. I remember." She stepped forward, the gun still trained on him. "You want to drag me back in chains? Do it. But you won't walk out of here pretending you're the victim. Not this time." Reid, clutching his arm, rose behind her. His voice was low but unwavering. "Get off my land." Silas hesitated, then signaled his men. "This isn't over," he spat. "No," Clara replied, her voice steady. "But it's not yours to control anymore." As Silas and his men retreated down the snowy path, Clara lowered the gun. Her hands were still trembling, but inside her, something stronger had taken hold. For the first time in her life, she'd said it out loud. She'd stood up, not just for herself, but for every woman Silas had left, broken in his wake. And Reid, he didn't see her as damaged or dangerous. He looked at her the same way he always had, with quiet, steady respect. The morning after Silas Wynn left Stonebrush Farm, the air was still heavy with what had nearly happened. Reid's arm was bandaged, his eyes darker than usual, but his voice was steady. Clara, though shaken, stood straighter than she had in weeks. Something had shifted. No longer just fear or shame, but purpose. They sent the telegram to Judge Emery Whitlow, a retired circuit judge from Cheyenne, who had once quietly pushed back against Silas's business manipulations. Clara had remembered his name not just from court records, but from hushed conversations in her father's study. Whitlow had tried to investigate Silas years ago, but the case had been buried under influence, money, and a father's denial. The message was simple, but carried years of silence cracking open. Emery Whitlow, urgent. Clara Wynn requests formal review. Suspect, Silas Wynn. Allegations, fraud, coercion, assault. Witnesses and evidence available. Please respond. R. Callahan. They waited. 2 days passed. On the third, a tall rider arrived at the farm just before dawn. Marshal Gareth Evans wasn't a man of theatrics. Broad-shouldered, wrapped in a long gray coat with a badge barely visible on his chest, he spoke with the quiet, clipped precision of someone who'd seen too much and preferred facts over emotions. "I was sent by Judge Whitlow," he said, stepping into the parlor. "He's opened a formal federal inquiry." Clara and Reid led him to the kitchen table. There were no lawyers, no gavels, just hot coffee, an old notebook, and the weight of a truth long overdue. Clara took a breath. Then she began. She told him everything, not just about the forged warrant Silas had brought to the farm, but about Lenora Talbot, the girl no one ever talked about. "She was 17, Clara said, voice steady. "Silas was courting her publicly, but when she refused to spend the night at our house, she was gone within days. Her parents moved east, but I saw her before they left. Her wrist was bruised. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine." Marshal Evans scribbled notes without interruption. Clara went on, about the altered ledgers from her father's business, the missing money, the false entries that Silas had signed with different names, many of which Clara recognized because she had once helped file them. Reid added what he had seen, Silas threatening her, lying with ease, bringing 2 hired men under false pretenses. "He's not trying to bring her home," Reid said. "He's trying to erase her, because she knows too much." Over the next week, Marshal Evans investigated quietly but thoroughly. He rode to town and spoke with Elias, who confirmed Clara's consistency and character. He questioned Mrs. Daly, who provided dates and details Clara had never shared. And he dug into Silas's financial records through Whitlow's contacts in Cheyenne. What they found was worse than expected. 3 witnesses who had claimed Clara stole from the family store recanted under pressure. 2 admitted they had been paid. A third was discovered to be a business partner of Silas. His signature matched one found in a forged land deal from the year prior. Then came confirmation. Lenora Talbot's family, now living in Missouri, sent a letter with their full testimony. Lenora, now married with children, had always wanted to speak but feared retaliation. With Marshal Evans's assurance of protection, she gave a full account of the abuse and of Silas's threats to destroy her reputation if she ever spoke. With that final statement, the investigation shifted. Marshal Evans returned to Stonebrush Farm with a federal document in hand. "The charges against Clara Wynn are officially dropped," he said. "Silas Wynn is now wanted for fraud, witness tampering, coercion, and suspected assault under federal review." Clara sat in silence for a moment, hands pressed together tightly. Then she looked at Reid. He didn't speak, just nodded, slow and sure. She was no longer the accused. She was no longer the girl cast out in disgrace. She was, for the first time, believed. And Silas? Now he was the one running. The frost had begun to lift by the time Clara stepped out onto the porch that morning. The air still held a bite, but the light, soft and golden, spilled gently over the hills of Stonebrush Farm, bathing everything in a quiet calm. For the first time in months, she felt still inside. Not because the storm was over, but because she had finally found her footing in the wind. Reid was already out front, coffee mug in hand, watching the fields begin to thaw. The snow had receded just enough to reveal patches of the earth beneath, hard, cracked, but alive. Clara joined him without a word, their silence more companionable now than it had ever been. He looked at her, something unreadable but warm in his gaze. "Sleep okay?" "For the first time in years," she replied with a half smile. They stood like that for a moment, watching the land breathe beneath the retreating snow. Then, without fanfare, Reid set his mug down, pulled something small from his pocket, and turned to face her. It was a simple silver ring, braided and worn with time. No jewel, no grand speech, just quiet strength. Like him. This was my mother, he said softly. I reshaped it, figured maybe it could carry a new story. Clara's breath caught in her chest. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes welled, but not from fear, not from grief, from recognition, from being seen, truly, deeply seen. Reid didn't rush. He didn't press. He held the ring between them like a promise, not a rescue. Clara looked down at the metal, then up at the man who had given her nothing but respect since the moment they met. And slowly her lips curved into a real, radiant smile, the kind she hadn't worn in years. Her voice trembled only slightly. Once, I traded my name for shelter, she whispered. Now I trade fear for truth. She reached out, steady now. And I say yes. Reid slipped the ring onto her finger without a word. There were no cheers, no witnesses, no music. Just the wind moving through the bare trees, the creak of old wood beneath their feet, and the steady thrum of two people choosing each other. Not out of desperation, but from the deepest place of healing. And in that moment, Clara knew. She wasn't being saved. She was beginning. The letter came on a quiet afternoon, folded neatly inside a yellowed envelope, the handwriting unmistakably formal, sharp with pride even through the ink. Clara found it tucked between the pages of the newspaper that arrived every week from town, addressed simply to Miss Clara Wynn, Stonebrush Farm. She sat at the edge of the kitchen table, staring at it for a long moment. Reid said nothing, only placed a mug of tea beside her and gave her the space she needed. She broke the seal with careful fingers, unfolding the single sheet of paper that carried more weight than any telegram or warrant ever could. My dearest Clara, I do not expect this letter to be welcomed, but I write it anyway, as a father and a fool who has taken too long to open his eyes. Marshall Evans came to speak with me last week. He showed me what Silas has done, the lies, the threats, the damage, and worst of all, the truth you tried to tell me from the beginning. I see it now. I see him now. But most of all, I see what I failed to do. I failed to listen. I failed to protect. And I failed to believe in the one person who had the courage to stand alone when the rest of us stayed silent. If you can forgive an old fool his blindness, I would like to know the woman you've become, not to bring you home, but to meet you there, wherever there may be. I won't write again unless you wish it. The choice finally is yours. With regret and with hope, Nathaniel Wynn. Clara read it once. Then again. The words blurred slightly as the tension drained from her shoulders, not in sorrow, but in the quiet relief of being acknowledged. She didn't run for a pen, didn't plan a trip home, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was standing outside a locked door. The door now stood open, not out of obligation, but because she had earned the right to choose when or if she walked through it. And for now, she chose to stay, not out of fear, but out of peace. Spring came slow to Silver Hollow, but it came, breaking winter's grip one soft breeze at a time. The snow melted from the eaves of Stonebrush Farm, revealing the hard-packed earth and the promise it held. Buds appeared along the fence posts, birds returned to the barn roof, and inside the house, something new was growing too. Peace and the rhythm of a life rebuilt. Clara stood beneath the old oak tree near the edge of the property, kneeling beside a wide-eyed girl named Lily, the blacksmith's daughter. Lily fumbled over the letters in a well-worn reader, brow furrowed with effort. Clara smiled gently and pointed again. That one's G, like garden. The girl lit up with understanding. Clara didn't just teach letters. She taught what they meant. She gave voice to a generation that might not be silenced like she once had been. And in doing so, she passed on something more valuable than literacy. The belief that even forgotten girls have stories worth telling. Back at the barn, Clara and Reid worked side by side. The old beam they replaced was the same one that had collapsed during the fire that took Reid's brother. It was heavy with memory, but this time, they raised it together. One end held by her, one by him. Equal weight, equal strength. As the sun dipped low across the field, Clara sat by the window, a journal open in her lap. She began to write, not a story of survival, but of becoming. To the children I may one day hold, I didn't always know what home meant. At first I thought it was shelter, then I thought it was silence. But I learned it's something else entirely. Home is where someone sees your scars and doesn't flinch. It's where your truth doesn't need defending. It's where fear ends and your voice begins. I didn't just survive, my darlings. I finally learned how to live. And beneath the last light of day, as fireflies blinked over the fields and laughter echoed from the kitchen, Stonebrush Farm didn't feel like a second chance. It felt like a beginning. Clara and Reid's story is more than a frontier romance. It's a reflection of something timeless. The quiet power of being seen, believed, and treated with dignity. Even today, in a modern America filled with noise and opinions, many still feel invisible, misunderstood, judged for their past, or silenced when they speak the truth. Clara's journey reminds us that survival is only the beginning. Healing begins when someone looks past your mistakes and sees your heart. And Reid? He wasn't a hero in the grand, dramatic sense. He was something rarer, a man who listened, who didn't try to fix her, but stood beside her as she found her own way forward. We need more Reids in this world, quiet protectors, steady believers. Stories like this matter not because they're old, but because they still happen, just in different clothes in different towns. So let us ask you, have you ever felt like Clara, cast out but still standing? Or have you known a Reid, someone who showed up without asking anything in return? We'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Your voice matters here. And if this tale touched your heart, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing the bell to follow more stories of resilience, love, and second chances. To all our viewers, especially those who carry decades of wisdom, thank you. Your stories built the foundation for tales like this. Until next time, remember, sometimes home isn't a place. It's a person who sees your worth,